I bumped into my cousin Marcus at Pioneer Place Mall while Christmas shopping, my arms full of bags from Nike and Powell's Books. The holiday crowds swirled around us as festive music echoed through the corridors. Excited about our planned family reunion trip to Yellowstone that everyone had been organizing for months, I grinned and asked when we were finally leaving. Marcus looked genuinely confused, his face scrunching up like he was solving a complex math problem. Then he dropped the bombshell that shattered my world. The entire extended family had gone last month without me. My stomach dropped as I realized I had contributed $4,500 toward the vacation fund through my Aunt Carol. Standing frozen while shoppers brushed past me, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. My fingers shook as I dialed Aunt Carol's number, stepping away from the busy mall corridor into a quieter alcove near the food court. The smell of Chinese takeout and pizza mixed in the air around me, but I barely noticed as my heart pounded against my ribs. Carol answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful and unsuspecting. "Jeffrey, what a lovely surprise to hear from you, sweetie. Carol, I just ran into Marcus and he said the family trip to Yellowstone already happened last month." My voice cracked slightly on the last words. There was a pause, and I could hear her television in the background playing what sounded like a game show. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted to something more guarded. "Oh, honey, didn't you get my texts about the change of plans? We had to move the dates up because of Rose's doctor appointments. I sent you several messages explaining everything." I frantically scrolled through my phone, checking every conversation thread, every text message from the past 2 months. Nothing. Not a single message about date changes or new plans. "Carol, I don't have any texts from you about this. My phone shows our last conversation was 3 weeks ago, when you confirmed my final payment." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her moving around, perhaps walking to another room. "Well, that's strange. Technology these days, you know how unreliable it can be. But yes, we did have to adjust the timeline. Your grandmother Rose felt it would be better for everyone if we went when the weather was more predictable." "What happened to my $4,500? "Oh, that money went toward the group expenses just like we planned. Everything worked out beautifully. The family had such a wonderful time bonding together." Her evasiveness sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Carol had always been direct about financial matters, organizing family events with military precision for as long as I could remember. This vague response felt completely out of character. What specific expenses? The camping fees we discussed were only about $1,500 total for the whole group. "Jeffrey, honey, you sound upset. I think you're overreacting to a simple scheduling mix-up. These things happen in large families. The important thing is that everyone had a lovely time, and your contribution helped make that possible." The dismissive tone in her voice made my chest tighten. I ended the call and immediately dialed my sister, Emma, who lived just outside Eugene near our parents. She answered quickly, but her voice sounded strained. "Jeff, is everything okay? Emma, did you know about the Yellowstone trip happening without me?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she sighed deeply. "Jeffrey, I wanted to tell you, but Rose made everyone promise not to say anything. She said it would just upset you unnecessarily." "Upset me, Emma? I paid $4,500 for that trip." "I know, and I felt terrible about it. But you know how Rose gets when people go against her wishes. She threatened to exclude anyone who told you from future family gatherings." My sister's voice carried genuine guilt, but also fear. Rose had been the family matriarch since our grandfather passed away 5 years earlier, and her word was essentially law at family functions. "Why was I excluded, Emma? What did I do wrong?" Another long pause. When Emma spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Rose said you were going through too much with the divorce and moving to Portland. She convinced everyone that you weren't emotionally stable enough to enjoy a family vacation, and that including you would bring down the mood for everyone else." The words hit me like physical blows. My divorce from Sarah had been finalized 8 months earlier, and while it had been difficult, I was doing well. I had a successful graphic design business, a nice apartment in Portland's Pearl District, and had been looking forward to reconnecting with family. Emma, that's not true. I've been doing great. I was excited about spending time with everyone. I know that, Jeff. But Rose painted a different picture. She said you'd been calling her crying about Sarah talking about how lost you felt asking for money. None of that was true. I hadn't asked anyone in the family for money, and I'd spoken to Rose exactly twice since the divorce, both brief and pleasant conversations about holiday plans. Did you see any of this supposed behavior yourself? No, but Rose was so specific about the details. She said you'd been drinking too much, staying up all night calling family members to complain about your problems. She made it sound like you were having some kind of breakdown. My mind raced as I tried to process this information. Rose had apparently constructed an entire false narrative about my mental state to justify excluding me from the family trip. Emma, where did they stay? We had planned to camp at Grant Village. Another guilty silence. They used your money to upgrade to rooms at the Old Faithful Inn. Rose said since you weren't coming, the family deserved to be more comfortable. They had individual suites overlooking the geyser. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. Not only had I been excluded, but my money had been used to give my family a luxury experience while I worked overtime at my design firm, believing I was contributing to a camping trip we'd all enjoy together. Did they post photos? Yes, but they blocked you from seeing them on social media. Rose insisted on that too. I felt dizzy standing there in the mall surrounded by holiday shoppers, enjoying their day while my world crumbled. The family I'd been desperately trying to stay connected to despite the geographic distance had deliberately excluded me and stolen my money to fund their betrayal. Emma, I need you to be completely honest with me. How long has this been planned? Since September. Rose called a family meeting at her house and convinced everyone that it would be kinder to you to go without you. She said you'd be relieved not to have the pressure of family time while you were still recovering from your divorce. 3 months. They had spent 3 months planning my exclusion while continuing to accept my money and pretend everything was normal. Every family phone call, every confirmation of my contribution had been an elaborate deception. Emma continued, her voice thick with guilt. Jeffrey, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but I was terrified of being cut off from family events too. You know how Rose can be when someone crosses her. I did know. Rose had been controlling family dynamics for decades, but I'd never imagined she would orchestrate something this cruel and deliberate. My hands were still shaking as I drove across town to my cousin Brian's apartment in Beaverton. Brian had always been somewhat of an outsider in family dynamics, working as an IT specialist and preferring computer screens to large family gatherings. If anyone would give me straight answers about what had really happened, it would be him. Brian opened his apartment door wearing a faded Blazers t-shirt and jeans, his curly brown hair disheveled from running his hands through it. His expression immediately shifted from surprise to concern when he saw my face. Jeffrey, what's wrong? You look like someone died. Maybe something did die. Can I come in? I need to know what you know about the Yellowstone trip. Brian's apartment reflected his personality, clean, organized, with multiple computer monitors glowing on a large desk in the corner. He gestured for me to sit on his black leather couch while he grabbed 2 bottles of Coca-Cola from his refrigerator. I wondered when this conversation would happen, he said, settling into his desk chair and turning it to face me. You knew I was excluded. I knew, and I've been documenting everything. Brian pulled out his phone and opened a recording app. Jeffrey, what I'm about to show you is going to make you angry, but you need to know the truth about what's been happening in this family. My stomach clenched as Brian scrolled through his phone. What do you mean documenting? Rose has been getting more controlling and manipulative over the past 2 years, especially since your divorce. I started recording family conversations because I had a feeling something like this would happen eventually. Brian touched the screen, and suddenly Rose's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. The recording was from a family gathering at her house, and I could hear multiple familiar voices in the background. Jeffrey's divorce proves he can't make good decisions, Rose's voice said with authority. He abandoned his wife, moved away from his family, and now he's trying to buy his way back into our good graces with this vacation money. Well, we'll take his money, but that doesn't mean he's earned the right to disrupt our family time. I felt sick hearing my grandmother's voice speaking about me with such disdain and manipulation. But there was more. The boy has always been selfish, Rose continued. Even as a child, he thought he was better than the rest of us. Moving to Portland just confirmed it. He thinks he's too sophisticated for Eugene, too successful for his own family. Mother, that's not fair, I heard my father's voice object weakly. Jeffrey has always been respectful and generous with family. David, you're too soft on him because he's your son. But I've seen how he looks at us like we're small-town embarrassments. This divorce is just the latest example of his poor judgment and selfishness. Brian paused the recording. There are hours of this, Jeffrey. She's been systematically poisoning the family against you for months, building a case for your exclusion. Why would she do this? Control. Rose has always needed to be the center of family decision-making, and you represent a threat to that because you're independent and successful. You don't need her financially or emotionally, which makes her feel irrelevant. Brian played another recording, this one, from a more recent date based on the timestamp. Jeffrey is so desperate to feel important that he threw money at this vacation without even asking what we really needed. Rose's voice continued her character assassination. $4,500 like he's showing off his big city success. Well, we'll put that money to good use, upgrading our accommodations. Consider it a donation to the family he abandoned. Hearing my contribution described as showing off when I'd sacrificed to contribute that amount made my chest burn with anger. I'd worked extra freelance projects and skipped several personal purchases to afford my share of what I thought would be a meaningful family experience. There's more, Brian said grimly. She didn't just exclude you. She specifically planned to use your money for upgrades while making sure you couldn't participate. The next recording was even more damaging. Rose's voice was instructing Aunt Carol on how to handle my continued payments. Keep accepting Jeffrey's money, but don't give him any real details about the planning. If he asks questions, just say everything is being handled, and he'll get information closer to the departure date. The boy is so eager to please and be included that he won't push too hard. Isn't that dishonest, Rose? Carol's voice sounded uncertain. It's practical. Jeffrey needs to learn that family loyalty isn't something you can buy your way back into. His money will give the rest of us a nice vacation, and maybe the lesson will help him become less selfish in the future. I stared at Brian in disbelief. She planned this for months, continuing to take my money, while having no intention of including me. Gets worse. She also convinced your parents that excluding you was for your own good, that you were too emotionally fragile for family time. But listen to what she said when they weren't around. Brian played a recording where Rose was talking to what sounded like Marcus and Aunt Carol. Jeffrey isn't fragile at all. He's thriving in Portland, which is exactly the problem. He's gotten too big for his britches, too independent. This exclusion will remind him that family matters more than his fancy city life and design business success. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty and calculation. Rose had convinced some family members I was too weak to handle a vacation, while simultaneously resenting me for being too strong and independent. Brian, why didn't you warn me? I tried to be subtle about it, asking if you'd heard from the planning committee mentioning that I hadn't received detailed itineraries. I was hoping you'd pick up on the hints, but Rose was so good at controlling information flow. Brian showed me text message screenshots where he'd tried to alert me indirectly, messages I now realized were attempts to help me discover the truth before it was too late. There's one more thing you need to know, Brian said, his voice growing more serious. This isn't just about control or personality conflicts. I think Rose has been stealing money from the family for years. What do you mean? She's always been secretive about family finances, claiming to manage money for everyone's benefit. But some of her stories don't add up. She's been talking about being financially stressed while somehow always having money for expensive purchases and home improvements. Brian pulled up a notebook on his computer where he'd been tracking inconsistencies in Rose's financial claims. She told your parents she needed help with medical expenses, but I've never seen her struggle to pay for anything. She told Aunt Carol the family trust from your grandfather was depleted, but she's been making references to money that suggests otherwise. The possibility that Rose's manipulation extended beyond emotional control to financial theft made my hands clench into fists. If she was stealing from family members while painting herself as a struggling elderly woman, this was about much more than a vacation. Jeffrey, I think your exclusion from this trip wasn't just about control. I think Rose was afraid you might start asking questions about family finances that she doesn't want to answer. The drive back to Eugene felt like traveling into a storm I'd been avoiding my whole life. Armed with Brian's evidence and recordings, I knew I couldn't let this betrayal stand without confrontation. But I also understood that challenging Rose meant potentially losing my relationship with my entire family. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had been a tradition for years, even after my move to Portland. I'd driven down monthly to maintain connections, bringing wine or dessert, helping with yard work, trying to bridge the geographic distance with consistent presence. Today would be different. My parents lived in a modest ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood near the University of Oregon campus. The familiar sight of my father's Toyota pickup in the driveway and my mother's garden gnomes lining the walkway usually brought comfort. Today, everything felt tainted by deception. I knocked instead of using my key, a small but significant change that announced this wasn't a normal family visit. My mother, Linda, opened the door, her graying hair pulled back in her usual Sunday ponytail, wearing the floral apron I'd given her for Mother's Day 2 years earlier. Jeffrey, what a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you today. I need to talk to the family about the Yellowstone trip. Her face immediately changed, the warmth draining from her expression, and replaced by something that looked like panic. Oh, honey, let's not spoil dinner with old news. Come in and tell us about your design projects. Mom, this is important. I know what happened and we need to discuss it honestly. The living room contained the usual Sunday gathering. My father David reading the Register Guard in his recliner, Grandmother Rose seated regally on the sofa with her knitting Aunt Carol, sorting through what looked like family photos at the coffee table, and my sister Emma with her husband Tyler sharing the love seat. The conversation stopped when I entered, and the silence felt heavy with unspoken guilt and anticipation. I ran into Marcus yesterday at the mall. I began standing near the fireplace where family photos displayed happier times. He told me about the Yellowstone trip you all took last month. Rose looked up from her knitting with practiced innocence. Oh, that lovely vacation. Such a shame you weren't available to join us, dear. But your work schedule is so demanding. I was never told about any date changes, Rose. And I contributed $4,500 toward a trip I was deliberately excluded from. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father set down his newspaper, and Aunt Carol stopped sorting photos. Emma's face flushed red with embarrassment. Jeffrey, let's not make a scene, Rose said with the tone she'd used to control classroom discussions during her decades as a school principal. Family scheduling can be complicated and sometimes miscommunications happen. This wasn't miscommunication. I pulled out my phone and played one of Brian's recordings. Rose's voice filled the room. Jeffrey's divorce proves he can't make good decisions. He abandoned his wife, moved away from his family, and now he's trying to buy his way back into our good graces with this vacation money. The reaction was immediate and telling. My parents looked shocked. Aunt Carol covered her mouth with her hand, and Emma started crying. But Rose showed no shame or remorse. Instead, her expression hardened into something cold and calculating. So Brian has been recording private family conversations. How typical of that antisocial boy to violate family privacy. Rose, you systematically lied about my character to justify stealing my money and excluding me from a family event I helped fund. I didn't lie about anything. I shared my legitimate concerns about your emotional stability and decision-making abilities. What concerns based on what evidence? Rose set down her knitting and looked directly at me with the authority she'd wielded over students and family members for decades. You abandoned your marriage instead of working through difficulties. You moved away from your family to pursue selfish career goals. You threw money at this vacation like you were buying your way back into our affections. These are facts, not lies. I didn't abandon my marriage. Sarah and I divorced because we wanted different things from life. I moved to Portland because I had better career opportunities there. And I contributed money to a family vacation because I wanted to spend time with people I love. That's your interpretation, Jeffrey. But your behavior over the past year has shown poor judgment and selfishness. My father finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. Mother, maybe we should discuss this more calmly. David, your son, is accusing me of lying and theft. I won't tolerate disrespect from a boy who's proven he values his independence more than his family responsibilities. The conversation was spiraling exactly as Rose intended, with her positioning herself as the victim of my accusations rather than addressing the actual betrayal. But I had more evidence. Rose, I have recordings of you instructing Carol to keep taking my money while having no intention of including me on the trip. You called it a donation from the family member I abandoned. Rose's mask slipped slightly, revealing anger beneath her practiced victimhood. And what if I did? You needed to learn that family loyalty isn't something you can purchase. Your money gave the rest of us a lovely vacation, which is more than you deserved after ignoring us for months. I never ignored anyone. I visit, I've tried to stay connected despite living 3 hours away. Obligatory phone calls and monthly duty visits aren't the same as genuine family commitment, Jeffrey. The cruelty in her voice shocked everyone in the room. This wasn't the loving grandmother figure she presented to the outside world. This was someone who had deliberately hurt her own family member and felt justified in doing so. My mother finally found her voice. Mother Rose, this doesn't sound like a miscommunication. It sounds like Jeffrey was deliberately excluded. Linda, your son needed a lesson in humility. His divorce and move to Portland showed he thinks he's better than his family. Sometimes tough love requires difficult decisions. Stealing someone's money isn't tough love, I said, my voice rising. It's theft and betrayal. Rose stood up abruptly, her small frame somehow commanding attention from everyone in the room. I have been holding this family together since your grandfather died, making difficult decisions that serve the greater good rather than individual selfishness. If you can't appreciate the sacrifices I've made, perhaps you should reconsider whether you belong in this family at all. The threat was clear and calculated. Rose was essentially saying that questioning her actions meant risking expulsion from family relationships entirely. I could see the fear in my parents' faces as they realized they might be forced to choose between their son and the woman who controlled family dynamics. But Rose wasn't finished. She walked to a drawer in the side table and pulled out a small notebook. Since we're sharing private information today, perhaps the family should know about some of Jeffrey's other concerning behaviors. She opened the notebook and began reading entries that made my blood run cold. September 15th. Jeffrey called Rose crying about his financial problems, asking to borrow $2,000 for rent. September 22nd. Jeffrey made inappropriate comments about Sarah's new boyfriend at Carol's birthday party. October 3rd. Jeffrey was rude to the Hendersons at church, embarrassing the family name. None of these incidents had happened. I hadn't called Rose asking for money, I hadn't attended Carol's birthday party, and I hadn't been to church with the family since Easter. Rose had fabricated an entire history of bad behavior to justify her treatment of me. Rose, none of that is true. I can prove where I was on those dates. Jeffrey, gaslighting family members who are trying to help you isn't healthy behavior. The manipulation was masterful and terrifying. Rose had created fictional evidence of my supposed problems while positioning any denial as further proof of my instability. My sister Emma finally spoke through her tears. Rose, I was at Mom's birthday party. Jeffrey wasn't there. Rose's expression darkened as she realized her fabricated timeline had a witness who could contradict it. Emma, your memory might be confused. Family events can blur together over time. No Rose. Jeffrey sent a beautiful card and flowers, but he wasn't physically present because he was working on a major client project. I remember because we talked about missing him. The first crack appeared in Rose's armor, as Emma's testimony directly contradicted the fabricated evidence. But instead of backing down, Rose doubled down with vicious intensity. Well, perhaps this family gathering will help everyone understand exactly who Jeffrey really is. Someone who records private conversations, accuses elderly family members of theft, and disrupts family harmony with selfish demands for attention. The room erupted in competing voices as family members began taking sides, some defending Rose's version of events, while others questioned her increasingly obvious manipulation. But I realized this confrontation had revealed something much more serious than vacation planning deception. Rose had been systematically constructing false narratives about my character for months, possibly years, laying groundwork for my eventual exclusion from family relationships. The Yellowstone trip was just the beginning of a larger campaign to remove me from family dynamics entirely. The family dinner had ended in chaos, with my parents torn between their son and the woman who'd controlled their family decisions for years. I left Eugene feeling emotionally drained, but determined to understand the full scope of Rose's manipulation. Brian's recordings had revealed financial irregularities that needed professional investigation. Monday morning found me in the downtown Portland office of Jake Harrison, a family law attorney I'd met through professional networking events. Jake's office overlooked the Willamette River with floor-to-ceiling windows that normally would have impressed me. Today, I barely noticed the view as I spread out the evidence of Rose's deception across his conference table. Jake was about my age, with prematurely gray hair that gave him an air of wisdom beyond his years. He'd built a reputation handling complex family financial disputes, particularly cases involving elder abuse and inheritance manipulation. Jeffrey, what you're describing sounds like financial exploitation, possibly rising to the level of criminal fraud, Jake said, after reviewing Brian's recordings and my financial documentation. But I suspect there's more to this story than vacation money. What do you mean? Your grandmother's behavior patterns suggest someone who's been manipulating family finances for much longer than just this trip. The level of control and secrecy you're describing typically develops over years, not months. Jake pulled out a legal pad and began asking detailed questions about Rose's financial role in family decisions. As I answered, a disturbing pattern emerged. Rose had been the sole executor of my grandfather's estate since his death 5 years earlier. She controlled access to any inheritance or trust funds, claiming the estate had been smaller than expected, and most assets had been consumed by medical expenses and final arrangements. She had convinced my parents to give her power of attorney over their finances, claiming it would make estate planning easier as they aged. My father, now 62, had reluctantly agreed after Rose suggested that failing to plan properly would burden their children. Rose had organized and controlled funding for all major family events over the past several years, always collecting money from family members, but never providing detailed accounting of how funds were used. Jeffrey, I think we need to bring in a forensic accountant to examine your family's financial situation more closely. What you're describing suggests systematic financial abuse. Is that really necessary? I just want my vacation money back and an apology. Trust me on this. Your grandmother's behavior indicates someone who's been operating a long-term financial manipulation scheme. If we're right, this vacation incident is just the tip of the iceberg. Jake recommended Patricia Chen, a forensic accountant who specialized in family financial fraud cases. Within 3 days, Patricia had begun a comprehensive analysis of available financial records related to Rose's management of family money. The results were staggering. Patricia's preliminary findings revealed that my grandfather had actually left a substantial trust fund specifically designated for his grandchildren's major life expenses, college education, weddings, home purchases, and family experiences like vacations. The trust had contained over $80,000 when Rose assumed control. According to these probate records, your grandmother was supposed to distribute funds from this trust when grandchildren reached certain milestones or experienced qualifying life events, Patricia explained during our meeting in Jake's office. Your divorce and the family vacation would have qualified for distributions. How much should have been available? Based on the original trust value and conservative investment returns, there should be approximately $95,000 available today. But your grandmother reported to the probate court that the trust was depleted by your grandfather's final medical expenses. Was it actually depleted? That's where things get interesting. The medical expenses Rose claimed don't match the insurance records or hospital billing statements I've been able to access. She appears to have fabricated significant medical costs to justify depleting the trust. Patricia showed me a complex spreadsheet comparing Rose's reported expenses against actual documented costs. The discrepancies were enormous and systematic. Where did the money actually go? Based on bank records I've subpoenaed, your grandmother has been using trust funds for personal expenses over the past 5 years. Home improvements, luxury purchases, vacation travel, and cash withdrawals that can't be accounted for with legitimate expenses. The scope of theft was breathtaking. Rose had stolen nearly the entire inheritance my grandfather had intended for his grandchildren, while convincing the family she was struggling financially and needed their support. But Patricia had discovered something even more disturbing. Jeffrey, your grandmother's financial manipulation extends beyond the trust fund. She's been systematically stealing from multiple family members using her power of attorney and her position as financial coordinator for family events. Patricia presented evidence showing that Rose had been withdrawing money from my parents' retirement accounts without authorization using forged signatures and falsified documents. She had convinced Aunt Carol to take out loans for family events instead of using available family funds that Rose was secretly controlling. Most shocking of all, Rose had been operating a sophisticated check-kiting scheme, using her access to multiple family bank accounts to cover unauthorized withdrawals and mask the theft of funds across several years. How much money total? Preliminary estimates suggest your grandmother has stolen approximately $130,000 from various family members over the past 8 years. The number was so large I had trouble processing it. Rose had been systematically robbing her own family while positioning herself as their financial protector and advisor. Patricia, there's something else, Jake interjected. We discovered that Rose has been forging signatures on legal documents and fraudulently claiming power of attorney over accounts that don't belong to her. This isn't just theft anymore. These are federal crimes. The investigation had uncovered evidence that Rose had been intercepting mail sent to family members, preventing them from receiving bank statements and financial documents that would have revealed her manipulation. She had convinced several family members that their financial struggles were due to poor market performance or unexpected expenses, when in reality she was stealing their money. Why hasn't anyone noticed? I asked. Your grandmother is extremely sophisticated in her manipulation techniques, Patricia explained. She's been gaslighting family members about their financial situations, convincing them that questioning her management would hurt her feelings or damage family relationships. She's used emotional manipulation to prevent financial oversight. Patricia had also discovered that Rose had been blackmailing family members with fabricated secrets, using threats of embarrassment or family exclusion to prevent them from examining financial records too closely. The evidence included forged documents, falsified expense reports, and email communications, where Rose had been coordinating her deception across multiple family relationships simultaneously. Jeffrey, your exclusion from the family vacation wasn't just about control, Jake concluded. Your grandmother was afraid that including you might lead to questions about family finances that she couldn't answer. You represent the biggest threat to her financial schemes because you're educated, successful, and independent enough to investigate discrepancies. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My supposed emotional instability and family disloyalty had been fabricated specifically to discredit me in advance of any financial investigations. Rose had been preparing for months to paint me as an unreliable source if I ever discovered her theft. What do we do now? We present this evidence to the district attorney's office and pursue criminal charges for financial fraud, forgery, and elder abuse, Jake replied grimly. Your grandmother has been operating a criminal enterprise targeting her own family members. Working with Jake and Patricia over the following weeks felt like excavating a crime scene that had been carefully buried for years. Every day brought new discoveries about the extent of Rose's financial manipulation, and each revelation made me question everything I'd believed about my family relationships. Patricia's forensic analysis had expanded to include bank records, tax documents, and legal filings spanning the entire 5 years since my grandfather's death. The sophisticated nature of Rose's fraud became clearer with each piece of evidence. Jeffrey, your grandmother has been operating what amounts to a Ponzi scheme within your own family, Patricia explained during one of our weekly progress meetings. She's been stealing from one family member to cover theft from another, all while maintaining the facade that she's managing everyone's money competently and honestly. The detailed timeline Patricia had constructed was devastating. Rose had begun small, taking modest amounts from the trust fund to cover what she claimed were temporary shortfalls in her personal finances. But the theft had escalated dramatically over time as she became more confident in her ability to manipulate family members and avoid detection. The pattern shows classic progression of financial abuse, Jake added. She started with rationalized taking, convincing herself she deserved compensation for managing family finances. Then she moved to outright theft when she realized no one was checking her work closely. Patricia showed me a complex flowchart mapping how money had moved between various family accounts under Rose's control. The web of manipulation was staggering in its complexity and cruel in its target selection. She's been particularly targeting family members who trust her most, Patricia noted. Your parents, Aunt Carol, and even some of your cousins have been systematically victimized because they believed in her integrity and competence. The investigation had revealed that Rose created fake invoices for family events, inflating costs by thousands of dollars and keeping the difference. The Yellowstone trip was just the most recent example of this pattern, where she had collected money from family members for camping expenses, but used those funds for luxury accommodations, while excluding contributors who might ask questions. But Patricia had uncovered something even more sinister. Rose had been deliberately creating financial problems for family members in order to position herself as their savior. She convinced your Aunt Carol to take out a home equity loan for family emergencies while she was secretly controlling Carol's savings account, Patricia explained. Then she offered to help Carol manage the loan payments, giving her access to even more of Carol's money. The psychological manipulation was as sophisticated as the financial fraud. Rose had been systematically undermining family members' confidence in their own financial judgment while positioning herself as the only person competent to manage family money. Jake had brought in Detective Sarah Williams from the Financial Crimes Unit to review the evidence we'd compiled. Detective Williams specialized in complex family fraud cases and had seen similar patterns before. This is one of the most comprehensive family financial abuse cases I've encountered, Detective Williams said during our meeting at Jake's office. The suspect has been operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise over multiple years, targeting vulnerable family members through emotional manipulation combined with financial fraud. Detective Williams explained that Rose's crimes were particularly serious because they involved elder abuse elements combined with organized financial fraud. The forged documents and mail interception elevated the charges to federal jurisdiction. We're looking at potential charges including mail fraud, financial exploitation of vulnerable adults, forgery identity theft, and organized financial crime, Detective Williams continued. If convicted on all counts, she could face significant prison time. The investigation had also uncovered evidence that Rose had been researching how to hide money offshore and had been making inquiries about retiring to countries without extradition treaties with the United States. She hadn't just been stealing money. She'd been preparing to flee with the stolen funds. Detective Williams, what should we expect when we confront her with this evidence? I asked. Based on similar cases, she'll likely deny everything initially, then try to minimize the scope of her actions, then finally attempt to justify her behavior as being for family benefit. Financial abusers often believe their own rationalizations and struggle to accept responsibility, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. Jake had been coordinating with the district attorney's office to prepare formal charges. The scope of evidence had grown so large that prosecutors were considering bringing in federal authorities to handle aspects of the case that crossed state lines. Jeffrey, there's something else you need to know, Jake said seriously. We've discovered that your grandmother has been planning to leave the state permanently. She's been liquidating hidden assets and making arrangements that suggest she was preparing to disappear with stolen family money. Patricia showed me records indicating that Rose had been converting stolen funds into cashier's checks and money orders classic preparation for financial flight. She had also been making inquiries about selling her house quickly and had been researching retirement communities in Arizona that didn't require extensive background checks. She's been planning this for months, possibly years, Patricia continued. The Yellowstone trip exclusion might have been her final test of whether family members would question her financial management. When no one seriously challenged her, she probably felt confident enough to proceed with her escape plan. The revelation that Rose had been preparing to abandon the family after stealing everything she could was perhaps the most hurtful discovery of all. This wasn't impulsive theft or gradual moral decline. This was calculated long-term planning to betray everyone who trusted her. Detective Williams had obtained search warrants for Rose's house and bank accounts. The search had revealed hidden documents, additional forged papers, and evidence of financial planning that confirmed her intention to flee with stolen funds. We found notebooks detailing her plans to liquidate remaining family assets and disappear to Arizona under a different identity, Detective Williams reported. This isn't just financial fraud anymore. This is organized crime with intent to permanently deprive victims of their property. The scope of Rose's planning was breathtaking and terrifying. She had been methodically destroying family relationships while stealing family money, all while preparing to escape and leave her victims to discover the theft after her disappearance. When do we arrest her? I asked. We're coordinating with prosecutors to time the arrest for maximum evidence preservation, Detective Williams replied. We want to catch her before she can destroy additional evidence or accelerate her escape timeline. Jake warned me that the arrest and subsequent legal proceedings would be emotionally difficult for the entire family. Many family members still believed in Rose's innocence and would struggle to accept the evidence of her betrayal. Jeffrey, your family is going to go through a grief process similar to mourning a death, Jake explained. The grandmother they thought they knew essentially never existed. The woman who's been controlling family relationships is a sophisticated criminal who's been systematically victimizing people who loved and trusted her. As we prepared for the confrontation and arrest, I realized that exposing Rose's crimes would heal some family relationships while potentially damaging others. Some family members might never forgive me for initiating the investigation that sent their beloved matriarch to prison, even though that investigation had saved them from continued victimization. But I also understood that allowing Rose to continue her crimes would have eventually destroyed the family anyway. Her theft was escalating, her manipulation was becoming more extreme, and her escape plan would have left everyone devastated and financially ruined. The courage to expose truth, even when that truth was painful and destructive, was the only way to save what could be saved of authentic family relationships. The confrontation took place on a cold November morning at Rose's house. the same location where she had orchestrated months of manipulation against me. Jake had coordinated with Detective Williams to give Rose one final opportunity to confess and cooperate before formal arrest proceedings began. Rose's house sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, their branches now bare in the late autumn air. The modest ranch-style home had always represented stability and family tradition to me. Today it felt like a crime scene. Present for the confrontation were my parents, Aunt Carol, Sister Emma, Cousin Brian, Detective Williams, and myself. Jake remained outside coordinating with backup officers in case Rose attempted to flee or destroy evidence. Rose opened her front door wearing a lavender sweater and her usual confident expression, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she recognized the unusual nature of our gathering. My, what a lovely surprise to have so much family visiting at once, she said, her voice maintaining its practiced warmth, despite the obvious tension. We gathered in her living room, the same space where she had hosted countless family celebrations, and where she had systematically planned my exclusion from family relationships. Detective Williams took the lead, introducing herself and explaining the purpose of our visit. Mrs. Rose Patterson, we're here to discuss irregularities we've discovered in your management of family financial affairs over the past several years. Rose settled into her favorite chair, maintaining composure, while her eyes darted around the room, assessing the faces of family members she had manipulated for so long. I'm sure any irregularities are simply misunderstandings. I've always tried to manage family money carefully and honestly. Detective Williams presented a folder containing the key evidence Patricia had compiled: bank records, forged documents, and detailed analysis of the systematic theft Rose had perpetrated. Mrs. Patterson, our investigation shows that you've stolen approximately $130,000 from family members through fraudulent access to their accounts, manipulation of trust funds, and systematic deception about family expenses. Rose's mask began to slip as she realized the scope of evidence against her. Her confident expression shifted to something more calculating as she assessed her options. Detective, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I've been helping my family members manage their finances for years. Sometimes accounting can be confusing to people who don't understand complex financial arrangements. Mrs. Patterson, we have recordings of you explicitly planning to steal money from Jeffrey and exclude him from family events you'd accepted his payment for. Brian stepped forward and played one of the most damaging recordings, where Rose's voice clearly stated her intention to use my money while excluding me from the vacation I'd helped fund. Rose listened to her own voice without showing remorse or surprise. Instead, she seemed to be calculating her next move. Those recordings were made without my permission in my private home. I'm not sure they have any legal validity. Detective Williams explained that the recordings were legally obtained and admissible as evidence of fraud and conspiracy. She then presented the forged documents Rose had created to steal from family trust accounts. Mrs. Patterson, these documents contain your forged signatures on accounts belonging to other family members. This constitutes felony fraud and identity theft. For the first time, Rose showed genuine fear as she realized the criminal charges she was facing. But instead of confessing or showing remorse, she launched into a desperate attempt to justify her actions. Everything I did was for family benefit, she declared, with the authority she had wielded for decades. I've been holding this family together since my husband died, making difficult decisions that serve everyone's long-term interests. You stole money from your own family members while lying to them about their financial situations, my father said, his voice shaking with anger and betrayal. David, you've never understood the complexities of managing family resources. I've been protecting all of you from making financial mistakes that would hurt everyone. Rose's attempt at justification became increasingly desperate as she realized no one was accepting her rationalization. She began attacking individual family members, trying to divide our solidarity. Jeffrey has always been selfish and ungrateful. This whole investigation is his revenge for not being included in a vacation he didn't deserve to attend. Mom, Jeffrey didn't start this investigation for revenge, Emma said firmly. He started it because you stole his money and lied to us about his character for months. Rose's composure finally cracked completely as she realized her decades of family control were ending. She stood up abruptly and began moving towards the kitchen, claiming she needed water. Detective Williams recognized the behavior as a flight attempt and moved to intercept her. Mrs. Patterson, we need you to remain in the living room while we complete this interview. I don't have to listen to these accusations in my own home. Rose snapped her voice, losing all pretense of warmth or authority. Actually, you do, Detective Williams replied calmly. We have a warrant to search these premises for evidence of ongoing financial crimes. Rose's attempt to escape through her back door was quickly stopped by the backup officers Jake had positioned around the property. As she was brought back into the living room in handcuffs, she made one final vindictive attack on the family she had manipulated for so long. You'll all regret this. Jeffrey has turned you against the one person who actually cared about this family's future. When I'm gone, you'll realize how much I did for all of you. But her words fell flat because everyone present had finally seen her true nature. The loving grandmother figure had been replaced by someone desperate, manipulative, and completely lacking in remorse for the harm she had caused. As Detective Williams read Rose her rights and led her to the patrol car, my mother broke down, crying. Not from sadness at Rose's arrest, but from relief at finally understanding the truth about years of family dysfunction. Jeffrey. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. She convinced us you were the problem when she was the one destroying our family relationships. The search of Rose's house revealed additional evidence of her crimes notebooks, detailing her manipulation strategies, hidden cash she had stolen from family accounts, and documents showing her plans to flee Arizona with stolen money. Most disturbing of all, investigators found a detailed timeline Rose had created for systematically excluding different family members from gatherings based on their perceived threats to her financial control. My exclusion from the Yellowstone trip had been part of a larger plan to isolate and remove family members who might question her authority. Rose was formally arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including mail fraud, financial exploitation, forgery identity theft, and organized financial crime. The evidence against her was so overwhelming that prosecutors were confident of conviction on all major charges. As we left Rose's house that afternoon, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and vindication. Justice was finally being served, but the cost had been the destruction of family illusions and the revelation of betrayal by someone we had all loved and trusted. 6 months later, I sat in Judge Margaret Chen's courtroom, watching Grandmother Rose receive her sentence for the systematic financial abuse she had perpetrated against our family. The woman who had once commanded respect and obedience now appeared small and frail in her Orange County Jail uniform, her authority completely stripped away. Judge Chen's words carried weight as she addressed the court about the severity of manipulating family trust for personal gain. Mrs. Patterson, you violated the most sacred bonds of family loyalty and exploited the love and trust of people who depended on you. Your crimes represent a profound betrayal of family relationships and basic human decency. Rose was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. She would also be required to pay full restitution to all family members she had victimized, with her remaining assets being liquidated to provide compensation for her theft. The financial resolution exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Patricia's forensic work had uncovered additional hidden accounts Rose had failed to disclose, increasing the total recovery of stolen funds significantly. The trust fund my grandfather had established for his grandchildren was fully restored with accrued interest, providing each of us with $22,000. I received my original $4,500 back with interest and penalties, plus additional compensation from Rose's seized assets for the emotional damage caused by her manipulation. My parents' retirement funds were completely restored, Aunt Carol's debts were eliminated, and Emma's children's college fund was re-established at a higher level than ever before. But the emotional healing proved far more valuable than any financial recovery. The family therapy sessions Jake had recommended helped us process the complex grief of losing someone who had never actually existed. The loving grandmother figure had been an elaborate fabrication designed to facilitate manipulation and theft. My relationship with my parents underwent a complete transformation as we worked through the damage Rose's manipulation had caused. My father, David, struggled with intense guilt over believing fabricated stories about my character and allowing his fear of Rose to override his parental instincts. "Jeffrey, I failed you as a father," he said during one particularly emotional therapy session. "I knew in my heart that Rose's stories about your behavior didn't match the son I'd raised, but I was too cowardly to challenge her version of events." My mother, Linda, revealed that she had always felt uncomfortable with Rose's increasingly negative commentary about my character, but had been convinced that supporting me would destroy family unity. She shared that Rose had systematically undermined her confidence in her own judgment, convincing her that questioning Rose's assessment would prove she was naive and easily manipulated. "Rose made me feel like I couldn't trust my own instincts about my own son," Linda explained tearfully. "She convinced me that defending you would just enable your supposed problems and hurt you in the long run." The family therapy helped us understand how sophisticated manipulators use emotional leverage and fear to control their victims' perceptions and behaviors. Rose had been operating a textbook psychological manipulation campaign that would have been difficult for anyone to recognize, while experiencing it from inside. Emma became my strongest advocate as she recognized how Rose's manipulation had damaged her relationship with her brother. She admitted that Rose had convinced her I looked down on the family and didn't value maintaining close relationships with them. "Rose told me you thought we were all small-town embarrassments and that your success had made you arrogant," Emma confessed. "She made it seem like you were just going through the motions of family relationships out of obligation rather than genuine affection." Brian emerged from the experience as my closest family ally, having provided the crucial evidence that made justice possible. Our shared experience of surviving family manipulation created a bond stronger than typical cousin relationships. Brian's courage in documenting Rose's behavior, despite the personal risk, had ultimately saved our entire family from continued victimization. The extended family dynamics shifted dramatically as members began communicating directly instead of through Rose's manipulative filter. Cousin Marcus admitted he had always respected my independence and career success, but had been convinced by Rose that expressing admiration would be disloyal to family members who had remained closer to home. "Rose made it seem like praising your achievements was the same as criticizing everyone else's choices," Marcus explained. "She convinced us that family loyalty required keeping everyone on the same level, which really meant keeping everyone under her control." The most profound healing came when my parents asked me to help them plan a new family trip to Yellowstone this time, including everyone, and funded by the restored trust money. Initially, I hesitated because of painful associations with the previous betrayal, but I realized that creating new positive memories was essential for moving forward. The new Yellowstone trip became a celebration of family healing and authentic relationships. I took the lead in planning activities that would help everyone feel included and valued, deliberately creating experiences that honored both individual interests and family connections. We spent 5 days exploring the same landscapes where I had been excluded, but this time every moment was infused with genuine appreciation for each other's company. The experience of hiking together through Grand Canyon of Yellowstone and watching Old Faithful erupt became powerful symbols of our family's resilience and capacity for healing. During a quiet evening around our campfire at Grant Village, my father approached me with tears in his eyes. Jeffrey, I need you to know how proud I am of who you've become, and how sorry I am that I let anyone convince me otherwise. You showed more courage and integrity in this situation than I've shown in years. This moment of genuine connection felt more valuable than any amount of recovered money. My father's acknowledgement that he had been manipulated, combined with his recognition of my character and achievements, healed wounds I hadn't even realized were still bleeding. The experience transformed my approach to all relationships, as I learned to trust my instincts about toxic behavior and to value authenticity over peacekeeping. My confidence in my own judgment increased dramatically, as I understood that the criticism I had internalized was based on fabricated information designed to control and manipulate me. My graphic design business flourished as I applied lessons about authenticity and boundary setting to my professional relationships. Clients responded positively to my increased confidence in advocating for creative vision and setting clear expectations about project scope and payment terms. A year after Rose's sentencing, I received a letter from her in prison, attempting to manipulate me into visiting and providing financial support for her commissary account. Instead of feeling guilty or conflicted, I felt only pity for someone whose need for control had ultimately destroyed her relationships with everyone she claimed to love. I didn't respond to the letter, but kept it as a reminder of the importance of maintaining healthy boundaries with people who view relationships as opportunities for manipulation rather than genuine connection. The final scene of our healing journey took place at my new apartment in Portland, where I hosted my first family dinner since my divorce. My parents, Emma's family, Brian Marcus, and Aunt Carol, gathered around my dining table sharing stories and laughter without any undercurrent of manipulation or hidden agendas. Looking around the table, I realized that exposing Rose's crimes had ultimately given my family the greatest gift possible: the opportunity to build relationships based on truth, mutual respect, and genuine affection, rather than fear and control. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people you care about is expose the lies that are poisoning their relationships, even when that exposure is painful and difficult. The courage to stand up for truth, even against family pressure, had ultimately saved not just my own emotional well-being, but had freed my entire family from a toxic dynamic that had been slowly destroying us all. Brian raised his glass in a toast that perfectly captured our journey, to Jeffrey, who loved us enough to tell us the truth, even when the truth was harder than continuing to live with lies. As we clinked glasses around my table, I understood that real family bonds are built on authenticity, mutual support, and shared values rather than obligation, fear, or manipulation. The family I had always wanted hadn't been destroyed by exposing Rose's crimes. It had been created for the first time through the courage to demand honesty and respect in our relationships with each other. Have you ever experienced a situation where standing up for yourself revealed deeper problems that needed to be addressed? Sometimes the hardest conflicts lead to the most meaningful growth and healing. I'd love to hear your thoughts about family dynamics and the importance of authentic relationships in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in difficult situations. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they have the right to demand honesty and respect in their relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to trust your instincts and stand up for truth in your own life even when it's difficult.